I can
Okay.
see it.
Okay.
Yes.
For a second there, the screen looked like when it started sharing, it did a funny thing that it hadn't done before, and I was like, okay, what am I sharing here? All right. So, yeah, exactly right. Given what's going on here, I thought it would be time maybe to go back and revisit this. This is actually the first book I ever studied as like a go to a Unity church and take a class book study. Um, it was at Christ Church Unity in Orlando. I had just started going there. The little Unity church that I'd been a part of down in Kissimmee had shut down. So I'd started going up to Orlando to CCU, and they were offering this class. I had just gotten divorced not too long before that from my kid's mother, and it seemed like a good thing to do. So I ended up in this class with like three other guys who've been divorced, and our licensed Unity teacher, who was actually getting ready to leave town. So we were all in one stage of transition or another. And it's interesting. Robert Brumet actually was one of my professors at Unity Institute. And I had him pretty much every year I was there for one class or another. And sometimes I had him for two different classes at the same time. He was really one of my two favorite professors there, and was very influential in my personal development as a minister. So this book is, if you're around Unity long enough, you'll probably run across this book, and it really is well done. He did such a nice job with this, and I know I had taught. It's funny. The last time I taught this was after Christine divorced me, and I was just telling Laura today. I remember that the last time that I taught this. I don't know if any of you who were at Unity remember, but Daniel Namod, who is at least well known in New Thought circles as a musician, he came to Unity and played on Sunday and did a concert in the afternoon. And it was like in the middle of the class. We were on the week where I was talking about the void, which I'll explain later. But it's a little further in, and I was really in rough shape at that point, and so I explained to Daniel what I was going to be talking about, and he said, "Hey, would you mind if I do an extra song, over and above, what I've already agreed to do?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. You're Daniel Namod. I'd love to have you do it." So he decides to put it in right before the message. And I was like, yeah, sure, great. Get them all warmed up for me. That's great. So we get to that point in the service, and he sings this song called "My Empty Hands." So I'm sitting there in the front row looking down at my hand that used to have a wedding ring on it, and I just cried my eyes out. I mean, I bawled like I had not since that whole thing started. I just dissolved. And when he was done, I had to get up and preach. So, yeah.
My phone froze up for a second. What was the song?
It was called "My Empty Hands."
Thank you.
And what it was about was that moment in time where something gets taken away from you, but it's so something better can get put into your hands. That you kind of have to clear the decks before before you can get what the universe has for you. And so I listened to that song with a very different perspective now, right? But it's always very present with me when I go back through this. But even reading it again this week, I've enjoyed it and found more stuff in it. So this is available on Amazon. You can get it. I think it's on Kindle. I'm not sure, but you can for sure get the paperback. And it's such a good book. Finding yourself in transition. So at the beginning, he talks about some of the difficulties that we have just accepting the fact that there is change, just dealing with change. And one of the things he's talking about is this idea that in our society, we don't want to acknowledge it when people go through a change. We like to pretend that things are just the way they were, you know. And if I mean, it's like to the point of, if you know, somebody, say for example, back in the day, you know, like if they lost their leg or something, it's like you wouldn't mention that. You know, you wouldn't look at them, you wouldn't call any attention to it. You know, it's funny. I'm friends with Nicole Watkins, and so now there's like a whole different way of dealing with people who become disabled, quote unquote, right? But people that have something that happens, you know, we're learning now that you don't ignore what happened, because they certainly can't. You know, they don't have that luxury. But you know, back in the day, and I certainly remember growing up, this was, you know, really common. Like if somebody got divorced, you didn't talk about it. It's just like they were never married, you know. And he says, his quote, for those of you on the phone, says, "I see and hear individuals responding to change in much the same manner I was taught. Ignore the past and get on with life. The problem with this approach is that it doesn't work. You know, it's like, oh, we're not gonna even talk about, you know, your ex-wife or any of that stuff, or your ex-husband or what happened before. We're just gonna pretend that we just, you know, everything's starting now." And I have a picture here of it's a wall that it's been flooded, you know, part way up the wall, and it's partially covering where somebody has spray painted, "I don't believe in global warming." You know, we tend not to, you know, I don't want to see that. There's, you know, that change is not happening. You know, but the thing that he points out is that these changes, these transitions, these things that feel like huge kerfuffles, crisis, you know, life's over with, are really an opportunity. And what Bob says is a major life transition is an opportunity for transformation, a transformation into an entirely new life. A transition is an opportunity for spiritual rebirth if we see clearly and respond wisely. And it's funny, I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago, about how the Chinese character for crisis is the combination of the characters for danger and opportunity, and I actually have them on the slide if you can't see them. What's interesting is I found, apparently it's two different written Chinese languages. There's another character for opportunity that's a lot busier. There's like a whole bunch of other strokes that have to happen. It's like, it looks similar to the, like there's a piece of the left-hand side of this character, but the one that looks like a lowercase r in this other language is it's like there's 4 different little drawings in there. So it's like you have to make a choice, right? So the thing about change is, you know, change is always going to be with us. And it's funny, we were talking before we really got started checking in that, you know, I think some of us have been holding out for when things get back to normal around COVID. But, you know, there's never really any going back. You know, it's like they say, you can't go home because the home you left isn't there anymore. You try going back and it's like, well, this is kind of lame, or that's not how I remembered it, or wow, this place is a lot smaller than I thought, or, you know, whatever it is. And Robert says that change is an inevitable part of our human experience. And then I have a quote on, you know, like in the picture from Heraclitus that says, "There is nothing permanent except change." It's absolutely, you know, it's absolutely the truth. We live in a dynamic universe, and that the rate at which things are changing seems to be increasing exponentially, which is another thing that's a little scary. And so that's scary is exactly the word. There are a lot of people out there right now who are scared. And I'll tell you, we get disappointed a lot with some of our, friends, neighbors, and relatives, especially those who may be of the more conservative ilk. And I've talked about this before, how, my brother, called me one night, kind of going off about how they want to change the name of Columbus, Ohio, and do away with Columbus Day. And, we've seen that in some of the other things going on where, as we're now kind of getting woke to what actually went down, but was not recorded as history, his story by the white guys who wrote his story, right? And there are people pushing back against that, calling it un-American to talk about what actually happened, right? And I think part of it is related to this, and that's why I pulled this quote out from the book. Robert says that rapid changes are occurring not only in the world around us, but also in the world within us. These changes are not just in technology or lifestyle, but are radical changes in the way that we perceive ourselves and our universe. Such changes are not just about how we live, but about who we are as human beings. Our assumptions about who we are and how we are related to the world around us are being challenged, if not shattered. And then I have a quote over on the other side of the slide from Robin DiAngelo in White Fragility that kind of addresses this in the context of the racial issues that we're seeing. And that text says, we consider a challenge to our racial worldviews as a challenge to our very identities as good, moral people. And that's a challenge that a lot of people are struggling with. And so the change in how we view white American society, that we always thought of ourselves as we're the world leaders and, peace, freedom, justice in the American way, and mom and apple pie and Chevrolet and all that good stuff, right? We're having to change the way that we view even those things that we thought of as bedrock ideals. And it's really upsetting a lot of people. So, one of the things that if we recognize what the process of change does to people, and we can see people struggling with this, even if we wish we could just say to them, just deal with it, it is what it is. Maybe we can have a little more compassion for them, even if they're going off on rants that we just don't want to listen to anymore. And here's the thing about change is a lot of us say, yeah, I want to change. Sure, I want to change. I want to quit eating sugar, except when it's in ice cream and cookies. I want to, whatever it is. I want to do better at this. Well, that may mean I have to practice. What? Practice? I have to change my schedule. I have to stop doing this other thing so I can do that? Really? Right. So as Robert says, we may have affirmed, I am willing to be changed. And yet there is something within us that unconsciously resists these very changes that we consciously desire. And boy, I will tell you, as an alcoholic addict, I absolutely get that at the cellular level. There were years that went by that I wished that I could change, but I just wasn't. I was just resistant to doing the one thing that I had to do to really change, because, I didn't know how to get by without my little crutches. My perception of the pain that I would experience if I changed was at that point still greater than, you know, my perception of the pain living life without those crutches, and until it got to the point where life was more painful living with the consequences of drinking. But it's this cartoon I have over here. It's a real classic. I've seen the top two frames a lot, and that's a pastor in front of a congregation, and he says, "Who wants change?" And literally every hand is up in the air. And then he says, "Who wants to change?" And there are no hands in the air. And then he says, the bottom one, which I've never seen until I was looking for this cartoon today, says, "Who wants to lead the change?" And there's nobody there. I mean, like the congregation's disappeared. And yeah, as someone who has led a church which was resistant to change, I can tell you this is not an exaggeration. But it's just a reflection of us on the inside, you know, because I've said before, I want to change, and kept walking down the same path that I'd been on for years and years. One of the things that Robert points out is that, you know, these changes that we're so afraid of, really so much of what happens is not about the change itself. Rather, it's about the meaning that we assign to the change. And okay, so I know that this has a little, this could have a grain of that's kind of metaphysical malpractice of, oh, so it's all up to me, right? Like, I mean, you know, you think of all the horrible changes that happen out there, like somebody dies, somebody, you know, gets cancer, somebody loses a job, somebody, you know, I mean, all those things that are, you just, there's really no sugarcoating them, you know, it sucks, right? You know, oh, if I just change the way I feel about it, then it wasn't a bad change, right? No, there are some things that they're painful events and they happen, and it's okay to assign a painful meaning to them because they're painful events, right? But he does have a point here. It is not so much the event itself that will alter our lives as much as the meaning we give to it. You know, I have lived through some events, and the meaning I assigned to those events made me miserable. And, you know, in retrospect, some of them were the best things that could have happened to me. I remember when my second wife threw me out over my drinking, which was what, you know, sprung me into sobriety 18 years ago. At the time, you know, being thrown out of my house seemed like the end of the world. I was bereft. I was beside myself, you know. Years down the road, years later, I am so grateful to her for doing that. I mean, I'm very, she saved my life. There's no other way to put it. She saved my life by doing that. But, you know, at the time, it was like, oh, my party's over. My life's ending. My marriage is ending. I don't, you know, I'm leaving my wife and my kids behind because I'm getting kicked out of the house, and now I got to quit drinking, and I just quit smoking, and, you know, it's like life. So what have I got left? The rest of my life, and a really good one. You know, my life today does not resemble my life then in really any way at all. And it's better. So one of the things that Robert, you know, gets into is the piece in Paul's letters about dying daily, about how, you know, change happens so often we have to let go of who we used to be on a daily basis. He says, yet we fear death, and this very fear of death, the fear of change, is also our fear of life itself. To be fully alive, we must be willing to be changed, to surrender into the moment without resistance. We must be willing to die daily, even moment by moment. To resist these deaths is to resist life. And I have a version of the death tarot card up here. It's funny when when Laura was, when we were mulling this stuff over, Laura's taken to playing with her tarot deck when she's just feeling anxiety or just unsettled about something. She'll just play with the cards. So she put out, she did a spread that she made up to kind of compare the job offer that she took to, the other one that she'd been given. And what was interesting was, like, in the place of the current situation for if she chose Oshner, she pulled the death card for there. And, it really is, this is a death to a life that she's lived in Birmingham for 21 years. Her entire adult life has been in the city. So it's very much an end. It doesn't, the death card doesn't mean somebody's got to die, but there is an ending there. And boy, that is, absolutely the case. But if we aren't willing to die to the old, then we're not able to incorporate the new. And to me, that's what life's all about, is going out there and learning and discovering and experiencing and finding that next thing over the horizon. And it's one of the things that Bob points out is that this really is a process, and processes are not respected by our society. As I was thinking about this, so his quote here is, "Transition is a process. In our highly mechanized, quick fix culture, we generally don't understand or appreciate the nature of process." And he's not wrong. I was remembering, and I'm going to date myself here, if anybody remembers All in the Family, the old sitcom from back in the 70s with Archie Bunker. So one of the things that Carl Reiner, the creator, did was he attacked subjects or addressed subjects that they hadn't broached on network television yet. He talked about stuff on All in the Family that they just, the sense between the censors and the sensibilities of the time, they hadn't gotten around to it. One of those things was menopause. So in this episode about Edith's change, Archie's having to deal with new stuff. Edith is changing. She's not behaving the way that he's used to having her behave. She's needing something, instead of him just telling her what he wants when he gets home. Edith actually has some needs, and she's not the same old Edith. Well, at one point he finally blows up and says, "If you're going to change, just change. All right. You got 5, here, I'm going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, change. You just change." And that's really very much what Bob's talking about here. We don't wake up when we're rested. We don't eat when we're hungry. Everything that we do is regimented by a schedule that is very mechanized and serves the industrial state, but it's not plugged into nature. And so I have a picture here of the monarch butterfly life cycle that starts with eggs and larvae and a chrysalis, and then it eventually turns into a butterfly. And part of that process is trusting the process and giving it time. And one of the things that Bob said was, anytime we violate natural process, we do damage and often inflict suffering. And I've got a little bit more, but I just want to leave you, with this real quick little story. I think most of us have heard the story of the guy that sees a butterfly that is struggling to emerge from its chrysalis, and it's pushing and it's pushing, and it seems like it's almost out of this hole, and it looks like it's expended all of its effort, and it's given up, and it just can't make it. So he helps it by splitting open the chrysalis. Well, what happens is the butterfly needs to struggle on its way out, or its wings don't develop right. And so what he really did is he kept the thing from being able to fly, and it kills it. And so often, we do damage, at least, emotional damage, if nothing else, and spiritual damage, maybe actual damage, by not allowing ourselves to go through the natural processes. I mean, the grief process is a great example. People just tell people, hey, it's, you've had enough time, get over it. Well, no, I mean, grief takes as much time as it takes. It's a natural process, and it's not always, a straight line forward. Sometimes there's a little do-si-do there. You take 2 steps forward and then step back. And that's okay.